as always, I'm proud and pleased that we're joined by Curtis Wilkie, who is our inaugural fellow at the Overby Center. He helped start this organization 12 years ago, and he and I have collaborated on many things since we started 12 years ago. So I'm going to turn the program over to Curtis, and I'll jump in and out as I see fit.
Good. Thank you, Charles. We are lucky to have two young men here who are, despite their age, seasoned veterans in Mississippi politics. Some of you may have been here last year to hear them, and they were so good they agreed to come back and talk to us this fall about our upcoming election in this state. And I will, at my far right, Austin Barbour, who is the Republican in this conversation, and he comes from a big, good, storied family of Republicans in this state. He's from Yazoo City. He's an Ole Miss guy, I might add, and he's managing partner of the Clearwater Group, which is a regional public affairs firm in Jackson. He's also a partner in Strategic Partners Media. It's a national advertising group that's based in Annapolis. So Austin, good to have you back.
Thank you.
And to my immediate right is Barbour Jones, who is the Democrat. They both have worked in many campaigns in the state. Brandon is from the Gulf Coast, from Pascagoula, and formerly was a member of the Mississippi House of Representatives. Has been active in politics, I guess, ever since you came back to the state from your education. He went to school at graduate Mississippi College in Wake Forest, as well as Mercer University in Georgia. And Brandon is now working as policy counsel for the Southern Poverty Law Center in its Jackson offices. So, gentlemen, thank you for coming back to be with us. And let me just start off with a very general question, and I want to get the perspective of both of you from your respective positions and parties. Austin, I'll start with you. Basically, assess for us the state of this race right now, the governor's race.
Well, Curtis, first I'd say thank you to you and Charles for having us. And let's get the record straight here. Brandon and I are friends, but he knows that his degrees from Mercer and Wake Forest and Mississippi College will never equal my 5 years at Ole Miss. And I will tell you, if you get a chance to stay 5 years, stay that fifth year. It's hard to come back.
I did it myself. I vouched for it.
There's a friend of mine who somehow found a way to spend 10 years at Ole Miss, and one time he was asked about that as he was thinking about running for office, and they said, how are you going to handle that question? And he said, I'd like to consider it a decade of excellence in Oxford. So there you go. State of the race, it's a close race. It is. This is a real race. I was very fortunate to be a part of the 2003 governor's race, which is really the last time we had a governor's race that was serious, that was close. Of course, Haley Barbour defeated incumbent Ronnie Musgrove in a very close race, 3 or 4 or 5 points. I don't remember the exact number, in 2003. And since then, we hadn't had a close governor's race, but we have one now. It's a real race. Jim Hood, the Democrats, had real money. He's spending just as much as Tate Reeves is. So, it's gotten a lot of attention, and it's a real race. And look, I think Tate Reeves is the slight favorite. And I know we'll get into the details of why I think that and why Brandon may think Jim Hood's the favorite. But I think as we go in less than 3 weeks now, Curtis, it's a real race. That could potentially go either way, even though I do think Tate is a slight favorite less than 3 weeks out.
Okay. Brandon?
Yeah, Austin and I have been doing these conversations now for about 6 years. And as a Democrat in Mississippi, that oftentimes leaves me having to puff up less than stellar candidates and try to convince folks that something's going to be close when it may not be. I think this year is unique in the sense that we actually do have a competitive race. So Austin's exactly right. And I don't think we're blowing smoke when we say that. All of the indicators suggest that Jim can be really competitive, and we expect them to be, so this is a real race.
Austin, I remember a year ago, and it was either here or I was on a program with both of you in Jackson summer before this past one, and you were pretty authoritative. You declared, I can tell you Tate Reeves is going to be the next governor of Mississippi. It seems to be a little wiggle this time.
I'm never scared to have a strong opinion.
No.
I'm also never scared to be wrong. But look, no, I've known I think most people who pay attention to Mississippi politics knew Tate Reeves was the front runner to run for, to be the Republican nominee. He had a much more serious primary than I think most expected. He survived it. He won it by about 10 points eventually in a runoff. And here he is again 3 weeks out as the slight favorite to win. So the only thing that's really changed since then was that he had a tougher primary than he thought that he would.
Well, that brings up, again, I recall last year you were somewhat dismissive of the prospect of Bill Waller getting in, and if he did, being a serious candidate. What message do you think it sends, and this is to both of you, that Tate Reeves had difficulty in the Republican primary? He didn't exactly roll over, and does that mean that that he has certainly less than 100% approval among the Republicans in the state?
I got to answer that with several different variables of that. One, he got 49.6% in the primary, so he's 0.4% away. So, look, he barely missed having a chance to win it without a runoff. Still went to runoff, won 76 of 82 counties during the primary election. Metro Jackson is what was tough for him. I don't know how many people in here are from Metro Jackson, Rankin County, Hinds County, Madison County. It's where I live. It's where Brandon. I live in Hinds County. Brandon lives in Madison County, and those are tough sledding for Tate Reeves. They were tough sledding in the primary election. They were tough sledding in the runoff, and they'll be more difficult for him than a typical Republican candidate in the general election. And I think it's because Tate Reeves has told a lot of people no for 8 years he's been lieutenant governor. You've got people that are lobbyists. You've got people who are government workers. You've got people who've come and said, hey, I want this. I need more money for this program, or I need this tax exemption. And like him or not, the guy is not scared to tell somebody no if he thinks it's the right thing for Mississippi. And a lot of those folks live, work, and reside in Jackson. So I think that's a big reason of why that he struggled there, and he will probably struggle there again in the general election as well, compared to what most Republicans would do in those three counties.
Yeah, Brandon, do you see any kind of ray of hope there for Jim Hood?
I was hoping we were just going to keep asking Austin uncomfortable questions for him. I like that. That's pretty good. So I think there are a variety of ways to read that. I would like to think that it means that some folks in the Republican Party are maybe inching away from kind of reactionary politics of the moment, maybe displeased with some of the hardline stands that Tate Reeves has taken. I think it's probably more likely to land here in the neighborhood of what Austin's talking about. One of the things that members of boards of supervisors across Mississippi and local elected officials will do during the course of the legislative session is go down and ask for help, whether it be in the form of funding or some other type of local private. And I would amend Austin's comment on that to say what makes Lieutenant Governor Reeves a little bit unique, it's not just that he says no. I think sometimes he puts some stink on it. And so you have folks who are kind of walking back hat in hand. I think you can only disrespect your local supervisor so many times before they start to become weaponized against you. So there are Republicans across the state who I think have sort of been a little bit frustrated with Tate's modus operandi there. Does that create an opportunity for Jim Hood? Typically, that type of thing does not, because generally when you get past a primary election, you get into the general election, folks come home, as we say. They go back and vote party line. What makes Jim unique, and we referenced this in our earlier answer, is that he has had success in attracting Republican voters every time he's run. He's had numbers that at times were higher than Haley Barbour's. He's at times had more voters than Phil Bryant. So he's clearly getting some Republican votes. So he may be the type of candidate who could possibly turn a Waller voter into a Hood voter. He certainly has the best prospect for that we've had in several cycles.
Yeah. How do each of you assess the Trump endorsement in this race?
Matters.
Matters and how?
That doesn't matter to a lot of voters in Lafayette County and Hinds County and Rankin and Madison, but it matters to these voters that Brandon just described that live in Lee County and Itawamba County and Panola County and Smith County that have voted for Jim Hood and Donald Trump and Roger Wicker in the past. These voters who want to vote Republican, but they've liked Jim Hood when he ran for Attorney General. They liked that Jim Hood was a good old boy. They like that Jim Hood is mostly a populist. And I think now that Donald Trump is coming in and putting his stamp on this election, a lot of those type voters who could potentially, I could definitely call them swing voters. These are mostly hill country, really a lot along the eastern side of the state where so many of those voters reside. I think that the Trump endorsement solidifies a lot of them for Tate Reeves.
What do you think, Brandon?
You know, in 2016, there was some open question about how the Republican Party would play President Trump, that maybe he might be held at arm's length in a way that other presidents had not been. I think we have to be honest and say that this is now the party of Donald Trump. And local Republicans in Mississippi and across the country, their political fates are in many ways tied to this president. Now, looking across the country, that is becoming increasingly a perilous thing. I think that sentiment towards this president is shifting, and it's shifting in a way that's not favorable to the White House. But I think it would be a little bit over-enthusiastic for somebody to predict that that's going to be to Jim's benefit in this race. Where you see most of the shifting taking place is among college-educated white voters. Mississippi has the lowest number of college-educated white voters of any other voting bloc in the state. And so those voters across the country that are second-guessing this president and who are thinking about things differently over the course of the last several months, we don't have quite as many of those in Mississippi as you might find elsewhere. And so where we do have them in places like DeSoto County, in places like Oxford, in places like northern Hinds County, you see more competitive politics. You see some of that seeping into the way they're voting. But Donald Trump is still a strong brand in Mississippi. His numbers are still quite favorable, and it would be Pollyanna to say that his endorsement doesn't help Tate. I think it does.
Austin, how much do you expect to see Donald Trump in here?
In Mississippi?
One visit, more than one?
I have not had a conversation with Tate's campaign about this. I would guess they would take him to Tupelo, maybe take him to the Gulf Coast, maybe to DeSoto County. I think he comes in and does one, maybe two stops. I think Mike Pence may come in, and I think it's the weekend before Election Day. So as I've managed campaigns in the past, and we were fortunate to bring in George W. Bush when he was president. This would have been 2003 and 2008. And we brought you bring him in the weekend before as you're really trying to get people excited and motivated. So I'm sure that's what they'll do.
I would love to see him come to Veterans Stadium in Jackson. One of the open criticisms of this campaign has been that African-American voter enthusiasm is not where it was last year. And obviously, Jim Hood is going to need black voters turn out in order to win. And so I heard it suggested by a state representative from Natchez last week, Robert Johnson, that he would love to see Donald Trump come a few times just to remind folks who's on the ballot and what the issues are.
And since you brought up the African-American vote, what is your expectation?
Well, I think it's hard to in the same way that President Trump's endorsement probably does pay dividends for Tate Reeves, I think that the specter of this White House on black voters in Mississippi, it is a motivating factor. So I think the extent to which, whether through Tate Reeves' campaign or through just word of mouth, connecting Tate Reeves to Donald Trump, I think is a motivating factor for progressive voters, including black voters. And so I think that's one of the factors that can drive up enthusiasm. And I think what you're hearing more at the doors and places across the state is making sure that that connection isn't lost. So I think it can be quite motivating.
And look, I mean, Jim Hood has got to do a better job in the last 3 weeks of driving African-American turnout. I think, you know, from afar, as I try to watch his campaign, and I don't know if Brandon will agree or not, he has struggled in that realm. He has done not nearly as good as obviously Mike Espy did against Sidney Hyde-Smith. I was asking a pollster before I came to this, what did they think the percentage of black vote was in 2018 in the Cindy Hyde-Smith versus Mike Espy race of the total percentage of people who voted, and they estimated that they thought it was about 32%. I don't think Jim Hood's going to come close to that. I could be wrong, but you know, I think he has really struggled. I think he has made, campaigns make unforced errors, just like football teams do, just like tennis players do, and every campaign does it. You try to limit the number of unforced errors, and I think the Hood campaign has definitively had an unforced error with how they have supported the Democrat ticket, everybody who's running for other statewide offices, particularly the Attorney General candidate, Jennifer Riley Collins. He's basically, you know, she's an African American. I think she's the first ever African American Democrat nominee for Attorney General, and he has, you know, basically not come out and endorsed her. And I think that's, you know, she's obviously a very smart person, a very legitimate candidate. And I think that's, you know, caused him a big issue, and we'll see how he handles that the last 3 weeks.
Party affiliation is a more powerful tonic for Republican voters. I mean, we like to say Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. I think that the way that Jim has tried to navigate these waters is to talk about issues that relate to people who are struggling, whether it be Medicaid expansion, which I think anyone who's aware of how often we use emergency rooms as our primary care physician or have seen the number of rural hospitals that have closed in Mississippi, I think those are issues that cut across, you know, race, cuts across communities, or talking about really honoring our commitment to Mississippi adequate education program, and then things like infrastructure. I think by emphasizing those things, that is how he's attempting to bridge that gap. And what we saw happen next door whenever Doug Jones won, I think everyone at this point who studied that race is pretty well aware that it was black women that made the difference. And he didn't get there by
An awful Republican candidate.
That didn't hurt. But I would say y'all have a lot of bad candidates and we still don't win. What he did was, rather than align himself with President Obama or align himself with the National Party, he talked about basic health programs that were affecting communities across Alabama, like the SNAP and others. And so Jim has tried to do that. I would agree with Austin, to not quite that effect yet, but there's 3 weeks. I think that's going to be part of the closing argument because, you know, as we're sitting here talking, I think most people assessing this race would appreciate that voter enthusiasm is one of the places where they need to really pick up their game.
We've got a local issue, and I'm just wondering how it plays, if at all, statewide. And is there any indication that the IHL's decision and the way they handled the new chancellor here at Ole Miss, whether that's going to have any kind of feedback, because all 12 members of the IHL were appointed by Governor Bryant, and that can be linked to Tate Reeves. Is there any indication that it's going to be a factor at all?
I have no data points to say that there's an indication of this, but I think the narrative here is a harmful one for Tate Reeves. And so I think there's potential for damage. And the reason for that is we're having a national conversation about secrecy. We're having a national conversation about cronyism. We're having a national conversation about backroom deals and how much of that we want to have in our politics. As you all are aware, the way that this whole process was laid out was a 20-point program. It was going to be done and played out in open. There was going to be a certain process that was going to be followed. It's my understanding that the IHL board made it through 12 of its 20 steps. That kind of underlines a certain amount of secrecy and politics working its way into the system without even connecting those dots and saying for sure exactly what happened. I think that's part of the national conversation. I think any politician that is linked to this notion of politics as usual or of, maybe cutting corners, which has been a problem for Tate. It's been one of the narratives that, of course, Jim has tried to make stick. I think there's potential for problem there. And I'm kind of curious, Austin, I noticed that Tate seemed to kind of embrace
Two questions.
the new chancellor, kind of embraced so I don't know. I think it could have some impact.
Look, I think voters look at politicians and they go, Republican, Democrat, you both do things that are, we don't like. You both are doing some things around the edges, and I'm not so sure that issue ever really sticks unless there's some just hard data or hard evidence to put on television. I think it's a problem for Jim Hood when the issue or when the news media or social media is not talking about the governor's race. When they're talking about what's going on in Oxford or what's going on anywhere in the state, it's not about the race. Because look, get back to at least my theory that Jim Hood is a slight underdog in this race. He needs every minute of every day to have as much oxygen on this race and about his attacks on Tate Reeves than anything else. He doesn't need people, let's go to Oxford and figure out who's mad in Oxford, or let's go to Starkville and figure out what's going on in Starkville. So that's how I see this could be problematic for Jim Hood, is if there is a tension that's not placed on the governor's race and his attacks versus Tate Reeves.
One other issue that is now going back and forth with campaign ads, and that involves the road that state transportation was asked to build, connecting the neighborhood where Lieutenant Governor lives to a shopping center, and the Democrats have tried to have a lot of fun with it, and Reeves is fighting back with his own fairly tough ad in the last week or two. How is this one playing now?
It's really interesting. As I mentioned, we've both done campaigns at a serious level, won some, lost some. And the one thing that you better know if you want to do campaigns, when you're hitting the home stretch and you're less than 3 weeks out, particularly when you're less than 3 weeks out, you better know what your message is or you're toast. If you're struggling to figure out what your message is, you are going to lose. I see Jim Hood's campaign struggling to figure out what their message is. In the last 8 or 9 days, they've run 3 different television commercials. That is problematic. One of them is on the issue that you brought up, where Tate Reeves has swung back at Jim Hood, and he's used editorials from the Wall Street Journal and editorials from the Greenwood Commonwealth, and Hood's had to respond to that. He's also, Tate Reeves has done a positive ad on education. Jim Hood has attacked on that. And Jim Hood has also been hitting Tate Reeves on sort of the Tate Reeves swamp based around that road issue and other money and so forth. That would scare me if I'm sitting in Jim Hood's camp, is, oh my goodness, what is our message? We're trying to figure it out. That would make me really nervous if I was in their shoes.
I'm thinking about Republican campaigns over the last several cycles where you have a multitude of various attacks in the home stretch, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with Austin's analysis there. I think that what campaigns do at their best is accentuate those things that people already tend to believe about the candidate. And if that can be a positive thing, then it's good. If you can accentuate something that people already think they believe that's a negative about your opponent, it's good. I think part of Tate Reeves' problem, part of the gravity that has kept him from succeeding in ways that every Republican in Mississippi is succeeding right now, is that people think there's a little bit of shade there. They think that he's a little bit concerned more with the politics of Tate Reeves than he is with the scope of Mississippi. And so by highlighting a moment where it appears that he was trying to make it easier for folks who live in his neighborhood to get to the mall faster while roads and bridges are crumbling across the state, I think that's an effective way to kind of highlight something that people are already somewhat inclined to believe about the lieutenant governor. And so I don't see it as losing message. I see it as, they held back on this because we knew it was going to be an issue months ago. And they held back until they thought, well, this is an effective time to drop a...
Of course, the problem is Jim Hood's office did the investigation. It's just terrible politics for Hood. We don't want to debate, the specifics of this issue because they're so granular that we don't want to have that conversation. I don't think anybody wants to in here. Happy to if you do. But I think it's a sort of the larger point. If, where my point is the message that Hood's trying to figure out. I think they are really struggling to figure out what their message should be as they come down the home stretch. And from someone who has, made television ads, someone who sat in the seat twice as a campaign manager, that would be very scary if I wasn't quite sure what we were supposed to be saying coming down the home stretch.
Do either of you think that the race might be close enough to where the electoral college style law might kick in here in Mississippi and send this in a different way from the popular vote?
Yeah, I'm afraid of that. I mean,
Want to describe that process?
He's referring to what we have in Mississippi, the electoral junior college.
We're talking about junior colleges here in Ole Miss.
Back the last time that Mississippi had a constitutional convention, there was a effort to try to respond to Civil War and other changes and changes in society. And so Jim Crow standards and laws were branded into our state constitution. And one of the vestiges of Jim Crow in Mississippi is a state law that would require someone who was running for statewide office to win not only a simple majority, but also a majority of the legislative districts in the state, House districts in the state. This was clearly an effort to keep black folks from winning statewide office. It stuck around. It probably should have been a subject, Charles, of greater legal scrutiny prior to this year. I suppose it tells you a lot about folks' feelings about this being a close race that we're challenging it now. But anyway, what that means is if a candidate does not win a majority and a majority of those legislative districts, then the race is then thrown to the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives checks in. They are sworn in. Typically, it follows an election. So they're sworn in, and then they vote on who the winner should be. Now, some of you may remember that in 1999, we went through this exact procedure when Mike Parker...
They weren't born in 1999.
Some of you might have been. Mike Parker and Ronnie Musgrove, that race was decided in that way, and of course, Ronnie Musgrove won the House. So that's the scenario that we're referring to, and to answer your question, I think that's a very real possibility. I mean, we're talking about a close race. And so it stands to reason that that could be triggered. And I'm just one of these folks that happens to believe that the person who gets the most votes ought to win the race. I feel pretty strong about that. I think our federal Constitution speaks to one person, one vote. And I think this is it's a bad deal. I hated to see Secretary of State Hoseman and Speaker Gunn come to the legal defense of this Jim Crow law, which they did in federal court. And given what the federal judge said during oral arguments, I'm not inclined to believe we're going to see a change, but I think it's an unfortunate law and just a vestige of the past.
Well, there are two third-party candidates in the race that I think may get 2 or 3 points each.
Austin Barbour, the champion of the third-party candidate.
Well, I'm not a champion of anybody. I'm a champion of Tate Reeves because he's my friend and I think he'll be best for Mississippi. But the reality is there are two third-party candidates running. One of them has been running for about 10 years. What's his first name? Singletary. He's the pro-marijuana candidate. You've probably seen his stickers around. Sure, y'all don't know anything about that. But, the guy's out there, and he may get 3 or 4%. But we'll see. And that'll matter. It could matter. And I don't know who he'll take votes from. I have no idea. So,
How about other races? Anything that we should be looking at on some of the other statewide races next month?
well, I mean, obviously the second race on the ballot is the lieutenant governor's race. And obviously the Democrat nominees from here in Oxford, he's probably friends with a lot of people in the audience, Jay Hughes. And he's got an uphill battle. He does. Delbert Hosemann may be the most popular candidate, maybe the most popular elected official in the state, not named Phil Bryant. And he's raised plenty of money and spent plenty of money. And as Secretary of State, he hadn't had to make people mad, as Lieutenant Governor and Speaker of the House tend to do, and the governor as well. So I think, Jay has certainly worked hard. He's been all over the place. But that's just a very difficult race for him to have a chance to win.
Yeah, the Secretary of State is extremely popular. There's no question about it. It's funny to think that most of that popularity is derived from a commercial that he did with a lady who couldn't pronounce his name. But welcome to Mississippi politics. That can get you an entire career. Jay is impressive in the sense that you would not typically think that a first-term state representative would be able to cut through the noise and put together a real campaign. But I think this is unique. I mean, 2 years ago, he just decided to go after this. He decided that education was going to be his major push. There's a great argument to be made that our legislature has not done its part in terms of fully funding our schools. So he had a good issue and has been everywhere in the state. I think buying the big bus was smart, moving about in the way that he has is smart, and he's just been just tireless in his campaign efforts. But I agree with Austin. I really, you would prefer, I kind of wish that Jay was running against someone that was not just in the stratosphere of name ID, because he is a very strong candidate. But this is a very tough race. It's going to be very difficult for him to overcome Delbert's name ID.
And I think this is a problem for Jim Hood on Election Day. You need other people on the ballot. You need other people who are running statewide, who are running serious, competent campaigns, who are doing get-out-the-vote efforts, who are spending money in the mail, who are spending money on digital and social media, who are spending money on television and radio to help drive out turnout. When it's just on the governor's race, when it's just on the gubernatorial campaign, that is very difficult. And on the Republican side, they have the advantage here. You've got Delbert Hosemann, who spent millions of dollars. I don't want to go down the whole list, but Lynn Fitch and Michael Watson and Mike Cheney and all these other individuals who are running the best campaigns they possibly can. That is a big advantage. And on the Democrat side, you just really have Jim Hood. I know, I'm not trying to take anything away from Jay Hughes. He has worked extremely hard. The guy has been everywhere, but he just hadn't had the money to try to keep up. And then as you go down the rest of the ticket, you don't see a lot from the Democrats.
I wasn't going to come at you for Jay. I just think it's kind of mean to criticize Democrats for not being able to raise money at the speed of Republicans. It's just until you start winning, it's tough to build that up. But I'm joking.
No. Because Hood actually has. Hood is essentially going to spend more money on Tate Reeves, about the equal amount of money as Tate Reeves is going to spend on TV. I don't know the last time that's happened.
Yeah.
Maybe SB spent as much as Cindy Hyde-Smith, but that was a ton of out-of-state money that was coming in, which is really the same on this race, where the Democrat Governors Association is going to come in for about $3 million to help support Jim Hood, and the Republican Governors Association will be in for about $2 million. And Democrats, you guys have not had a candidate to do that for governor since Musgrove in 2003. I guess John Arthur East had a little bit of his own money in 2007, but not serious to any degree.
That's right. But,
So.
I mean, back to your question, I think there are two down-ticket Democratic candidates that are really interesting and could bring some people out. I mean, one of them is Johnny Dupree. Johnny Dupree is the former Democratic candidate for governor, and this is a guy who served 2 terms as supervisor in Forest County, 3 terms as the mayor of Hattiesburg, oversaw Forest County and Hattiesburg's kind of rise in business and other ways. During his tenure, Hattiesburg became the 2nd largest tax base in the state, which is not insignificant, and oversaw a variety of different innovations and changes in that part of the state. And it's a really well-liked leader, and so he may help answer that question of African-American voter enthusiasm. It helps to have folks on the ballot that look like you and that represent your values and that can speak to leadership in the way that he can. So I think he could be an interesting factor. And interestingly, Michael Watson, who did spend a lot of money, has actually not spent much of that money since the primary, kind of under the assumption, I guess, that you just win by showing up and being a Republican on election day. But Johnny Dupree could be interesting. Ricky Cole is a 2-time chairman of the Democratic Party. He's running for Commissioner of Agriculture and has run a pretty interesting campaign, has offered some pretty innovative ideas. Any of you who know Ricky knows that he knows about as much about Mississippi history as anybody you could find and has been involved in races all across the state, knows people in every county in the state. And
he has an elaborate collection of hats.
Has an elaborate collection of hats and overalls, which I think is all good. We need more overalls in the Democratic Party. But he is talking about increasing the number of food inspectors that we have in the state. I am shocked every time he talks about how we have fallen behind in inspecting food, something as basic as who checks on our restaurants, who makes sure that the way that we're selling and packaging food is done properly. That's an important issue, and he's talking about it across the state.
Sounds like he's anti-restaurant. I'm pro-restaurant. I don't know about that guy.
So I think you have some interesting candidates who, if all things were equal, would absolutely be superior candidates. But to your point, money matters, party affiliation matters. But those two could be interesting on election day.
Well, I don't want to bore you guys, but numbers matter. And I got these stats going back to 2003, looking at 2019, and this is the real problem for Democrats is, can you overcome this? And I'll do this in less than 30 seconds. In 2003, 190,000 people voted in the Republican primary. 517,000 voted in the Democrat primary. It's 2003. I'm going to skip to 2019. Again, 190,000 people voted in the Republican primary in 2003. In 2019, that number doubled to 383,000. Okay, so the Republican number doubled, 190 to 383. There's my Ole Miss math. That's pretty good. And in 2003, 517,000 people voted in the Democrat primary. In 2019, 302,000 people, 215,000 less people. That is problematic when you're just looking for people to come and say, I voted Democrat in the primary, I'm going to come back and vote for the nominee no matter who it is. And it's a scary scenario when you're just looking at raw votes in terms of who you can get back out on the general election day.
Repeat the 19 numbers for Democrats, Republicans.
Yes, sir. In 2019, obviously this year, 383,000 people voted, double of what voted in the Republican primary in 2003. 302,000 voted Democrat, which was 215,000 less than voted in the Democrat primary in 2003.
Austin, since we don't have party registration, you can get people who jump into these primaries who are not necessarily party loyalists. I know a whole lot of people who voted in the Republican primaries this year simply to vote against Tate Reeves.
Sure. Well, I would say I would go back and look 4 years before this. 299,000 people voted. So in the Democrat primary, 279,000. So the trend has been going this way. I understand. There are people who go in just to vote against somebody and they have no intention of voting for that nominee in the general election. But it's difficult math.
And that number is driven by primarily local races. Most people participate in primaries on the basis of who they're voting for at the local level. So if you have a sheriff that's in a tough primary, that typically draws you out. Same goes for, city council races, other things of that nature. Republicans have been incredibly effective over the last 20 years at recruiting local candidates to switch parties. And so I think they've been, about every time a rural hospital closes, Republicans get another local Democrat to switch parties.
I'm not taking your
weird
bait.
phenomenon.
I want to go to the audience now to join this conversation. And so let's hear from the audience for questions.
Ask
sir.
Brandon tough questions, me easy ones.
Yes, sir, right here.
I'm not sure this is that relevant, but we assume that Trump is going to come in on behalf of Tate Reeves and other Republicans on the ticket. He had a massive rally on behalf of John Bell Edwards in Louisiana, who was polling before the race at 47%. That's what he got in the election, 47%, which suggests that Trump did not move the needle any by his rather large performance here. Does that raise any signal for you?
I would say that most people that I knew or know in Louisiana thought that John Bell Edwards would win it without a runoff, and that Trump getting involved the last couple of weeks helped maybe knock him down a point or two. I'm not doubting your 47% number there. Those were Louisiana folks that I was talking to. And the president started paying attention to that race a couple weeks out, which is essentially what he's done with this race as well.
You would hope that kind of white-hot excitement that surrounded those gatherings for the last couple cycles is starting to fade a little bit. I mean, I don't think there's any question that there is a base of support for the president here in this state, and I think there will be. And so there's no question that his presence can move the needle, depending on timing, depending on where. But I like to think that maybe that influence is not quite what it has been, until recently.
But I'm glad you brought the Louisiana race up because it matters. There are only 3 governors' races in the country this year: Kentucky, Mississippi, and Louisiana. If you're the Democrat Governors Association, you only have so much money in the bank, and you can only spend it in 3 places right now. You can't lose Louisiana. So that is another issue that's difficult for Jim Hood, because excess cash that the Democrat Governors Association could have had if John Bell Edwards would have won that without a runoff, they could have given to Hood. They could, that's less staff, that's less volunteers, and certainly less cash that they have to spend here. So what does that mean in terms of numbers? It's not a good thing for Jim Hood. But we'll see. Good question. Great question.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am. You have a microphone there? Use the microphone.
Oh, I just wanted to comment on the restaurant issue.
Remember, I'm pro-restaurant.
Yeah,
He's
I'm
anti.
pro-restaurant too. I just want to be able to go home at night and not throw up. So, I think inspections are a great thing.
Of course I do too. I am pro-restaurant. I do like restaurants. But yeah, look, when I go into a restaurant, I want to make sure my food is good and I can eat it and it's been inspected properly. I'm all for that. Yeah, absolutely. No rats in the kitchen. Exactly. And when I was in school here, I worked in quite a few restaurants. I won't say which ones. Oh, I had a lot of fun though.
Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so
Wait for the mic, if you will, so everybody can hear your question.
So a lot of us are, that's really loud. A lot of us are obviously Ole Miss students here, as you can see, and relatively young. A lot of us have just, I would hope, registered to vote and become Mississippi voters. So as new voters, what would you say would be something that we need to be on the lookout for as we prepare to vote, possibly for the first time in a state election for governor?
Yeah, well, issues, you mean? Like what might move the needle, or just the logistics of voting?
Yeah, either one. Just what are some big things? That
Yeah, well, a couple things to know, and that's, by the way, that's fantastic, and we need everybody to get registered to vote, and that's an area where, my shop, Southern Poverty Law Center, has been spending a lot of time and energy. We're not nonpartisan group that has been trying to register students like yourself across the state, and so I'm glad to hear that's happening, and encourage everybody you know to do it, even if not for this year, for next year. Some interesting things about Mississippi. We don't register partisan. So you will sometimes hear people say, I'm a registered Democrat or a registered Republican. Not in Mississippi. We don't have party registration. And so what that means is you can participate in either party's primary, and so long as there's not a runoff, you don't have really anything else to know. You can go to the general election and vote for whoever. Another thing to understand is we do have a voter ID law that passed not too long ago. And so there are a variety of different types of identification that you can have. Your student ID is an acceptable form. So it's good to check on that, make sure you have it. Also in the Secretary of State's office, you can do a precinct check. You can say, where do I vote? And type in your address, and it'll tell you what your precinct is. All of that is important because when you go to vote, somebody who's working there will open up a book, check your name, check your address to make sure that it's you. And so all of that stuff kind of factors into it. But the main thing for people to know is it's not hard. You're a college student. You're going to have an easy time. And any question that you have, there will be someone there who can answer it. And so we need to demystify the voting process as best as possible. You can engage in it. Now, if you're talking about issues, I think that Jim Hood has raised issues that are important to quality of life. Things like Medicaid expansion would mean that thousands of Mississippians who currently don't have access to health care would have access to health care. That would mean preventative care. That would reduce the debt and burden that is placed on folks with health care. It would also build needed infrastructure in places around Lafayette County where, there are parts of this state where you can be in a cataclysmic accident and you are just dead by virtue of the fact that we do not have emergency medical care. That's an unacceptable answer in the 21st century. So expanding Medicaid is a necessity for states at our income level. And there are those who have much more money than we do who have expanded, including Mike Pence's Indiana. Another thing are things like infrastructure, roads and bridges. I don't care how old you are. It matters that you not run off the road or that your bridge work or that you not have to navigate potholes as we so often do in central Mississippi. And then education. I mean, just the basic thing of valuing teachers, making sure that we're recruiting the best teachers that we can by paying them a competitive wage. For Jim, what he has said is that means comparing teacher salaries in Mississippi to the 5 surrounding areas. And if we're not competitive in that range, then how do we expect people to stay here and want to work here and invest in classrooms? So I think those are issues that matter. And I mean, you just ought to agree.
I just whispered, are you going to keep talking? We're buddies. We can mess with each other. Look, I'm going to give you a 30-second answer. I grew up in Yazoo City, Mississippi, small town, okay? I don't live there now, which really it kind of depresses me some. I'm raising my 2 children, my wife and I are, in Jackson. Nothing's wrong with Jackson, but I miss that small town life, okay? I want kids like y'all, you're still kids, who graduate to stay in Mississippi first and foremost. And if you want to move back to Tupelo or Tunica or Yazoo City or Yalobusha County, I want you to be able to do that. It is so important for us to be able to have real quality of life in our small towns. It's one of the great things about growing up in a rural state, growing up in a small town. Nothing wrong with growing up in Jackson or in Gulfport or in South Haven. I guess we're calling South Haven a big town now. There's nothing wrong with that. So you need to think about which candidate is going to try to do everything they can to reverse the brain drain. I don't want y'all to go to Birmingham or Atlanta or Dallas or Nashville or Washington. If you want to go do that for a couple of years, that's cool, but come back. We need you here. And we particularly need you to be able to go back to a small town, earn a bunch of money, create new opportunities for those people who in those small towns who can't create the opportunities but would love a chance to work for someone like you guys who's smart and create new opportunities. That is one of the most important things for me, and that's what I'd be thinking about if I was about to graduate from Ole Miss in the next year or in the next 3 years. Which guy who's running right now can help me fix that situation?
Other questions? Yes, sir, in the back.
So, has there been a way to track voters like the ones that, let's say, voted for Republican primary, like with Foster and Waller, to see whether they have switched to, or even the ones that left Jim Hood, or that didn't support Hood, and this is really broken, or that went from Hood to, say, another Republican, to see, like, are they switching parties, or are they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. I can tell you're thinking about campaigns one day in your future. You absolutely can do that. You can do that with polling. You can do that with focus groups. You can find out, okay, you can ask someone on the phone, were you a Foster voter? Did you vote in the Republican primary? Oh, you did. Who'd you vote for? Oh, you voted for Bill Waller. Well, now who are you for in the general election? Oh, you're for Jim Hood. You're for Tate Reeves. Yeah, there are ways to do that.
I don't think he meant, can you do it? I think he wants to know, well, whether there are any results that you know about.
I haven't. Absolutely, there are results, and I haven't seen them.
Campaigns tend to hold that information pretty close. I do believe, just based on public statements, that Jim Hood believes he's got a shot at Waller voters. What data points he's relying on to get there, I don't know.
Yeah, sorry I missed your question, but good question.
Well, what are the polls showing, private polls?
That's why they're private.
From what I've seen, the campaign polls and the public polls are, and Austin may have a totally different answer, are tracking pretty closely, and that shows a marginal lead for Jim Hood right now, and that's you know. As somebody who's followed these races for a long time, it's very hard to get excited about something that's within the margin of error. But it's, you know, the ones that we've seen published over the course of the last 3 weeks shows a marginal lead for Hood.
Do you believe that?
No,
Why?
because Brandon's always wrong. I'm just joking. No, but just because I've seen other numbers and I'm not going to go into them. And that's why I feel like Tate Reeves is a slight favorite in the race.
Any last question from the audience? Do you think that the turnout will be substantially larger than previous governor's races?
I want to answer that, but I want to first say, again, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all for coming out. We don't agree on a lot of things in politics, but we do a TV show once a week during the legislative session. We do things like this all the time. And we have always said since we started doing this is a good debate for us to be able to have and to not hate each other. And for me not to scream at him most of the time, and for him not to scream at me most of the time. So I encourage you, I think it's really important as you're a college student and you're in political science classes or journalism classes or whatever it is, have a debate. Have a debate with people that you may disagree with, but show them respect as well. And ask them to do the same for you. You can disagree, but you don't have to hate each other. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to continue to do that. In terms of the turnout, you know, in 2003 we had 894,000. It dropped down 150, went back up to about 893 in 11, dropped down. I think we're headed to 830 to 850,000 people. What smart people who looked at this are guessing for this turnout, which would be slightly down from 2011 and 2003.
Do you agree with that, Brandon?
Yeah, I think that's pretty safe. I mean, you know, you're talking about registering to vote. Our voter participation in Mississippi is pretty abysmal. You have an overwhelming number of folks who are registered to vote who don't participate, and so, and look, sometimes the blame for that rests at the feet of the candidates. You know, you have to motivate people, but you know, I would really like to see a greater participation, but I think if we're just following the historical data points, that seems to play out. And look, I joined Austin. This has been a wonderful place to come. You know, Austin's right. We do a lot of these things, but Overby Center has been great host. Thanks to you both for having us, and thanks to you all for participating. And I'll join Austin in making that challenge. I think if you can find somebody that you disagree with, to have a conversation once a week, it's a great discipline. It's amazing the stuff that I have learned simply by listening to his nonsense over and over again. You also
I have a lot of nonsense.
Yeah, you also, learning how to engage in a civil way, learning how to express yourself better. That's easy to do when it's an echo chamber. It's easy to do when you're back in the dorm room with somebody you agree with. The real challenge there is to talk across differences. So the extent to which you can find opportunities to do that, I mean, we as a country, I think, not just as Mississippians, but as a country, I think we have got to do a better job of communicating across differences. I think a lot of our future is tied to how well we do that. So, yeah.
Thank you. The number one priority of the Overby Center has been and is civil discourse. And Austin and Brandon have shown how good that is tonight. Join me in thanking them for being here.